Well, Growers Edge, I think, has made us more money by allowing me to survey the local bids that I'm in the area that I want to sell my grain. The local elevators and the ethanol plants know that this information is out there, so they've got to be competitive if they want to get the grain. You know, we've been able to maximize our return on our farm.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Friday edition of GrainTV. It's February 20th. Grains, we're in a selling mood today. Let's take a look at the grain hedge trading platform and see where we closed. Corn was down 4 cents a bushel, while soybeans was off 7, and the big leader to the downside was wheat, losing a whopping 18 cents on the nearby March contract. Looking at export sales this morning, probably wheat got a little defensive as a result of very light export sales. Our exports for the week came in only at 266,000 metric tons versus 300 to 500,000, which is what analysts were looking for going into this report. Obviously, the Egypt deal was sitting sour on the grain market. We saw those deals actually get closed with France and a little bit of Romanian wheat, but U.S. was certainly not competitive in terms of prices. As we look at the other sectors of export sales, corn coming in on the high side at 932,000 metric tons versus 650 to 900,000, which was the expectation going into the report. Beans coming in right in the middle sort of expectations at 505,000. This again is continuing to be fairly strong, even though we're expecting sales to start to dry up. When we look at sort of cumulative sales to date, you know, corn is certainly keeping above the green pace line, which is what we expect to need to reach USDA's export expectations. Right now, cumulative export sales are 34.1 million metric tons year to date versus this time last year in blue, which was 35.2. So we're a little shy of last year, but still well ahead of that green pace line that we need to reach the USDA expectations. For soybeans, a much different story here, with soybeans continuing to outperform not only last year's level, but the pace line. It has certainly been slowing down of late, but this week's sales of 500,000 metric tons, again, is a strong number in light of the fact that we would expect most of the business to be going to South America right now. So still a fairly sizable amount of beans being sold. In wheat, as we mentioned earlier, a definitively bad week for wheat, coming in below 300,000 metric tons. We're still right on pace with that green line, but this again is nothing to write home about compared to the blue line, which was last year. So our sales continue to be subpar, if you will, nothing to get excited about. And I think the market today was giving us more indication that U.S. wheat is overpriced when it sells off 18 cents going into the weekend. Now, on Friday, we obviously look at the grain basis levels around the country this week. Overall, we had fairly strong futures markets for corn and beans. Beans in particular was up sharply, but the basis for beans was pretty much flat. We saw very little movement. There was some notable strength along the river terminals. They continue to have pretty strong export sales and export shipments, so they're trying to keep those pipelines moving. But in terms of end users like soy crush plants, we're not seeing much movement there. We saw a bit of weakness, especially in Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, at some key crushing facilities this week. So overall, it was a pretty flat week in corn and soybeans. In corn, not much better. It was up a penny a bushel for basis, but again, nothing very substantial there in terms of overall movement. What's interesting, though, is when we look at river terminals, they are really bidding up for March delivery over spot delivery. We're seeing premiums in the neighborhood of 7 to 9 cents a bushel for March delivery versus spot delivery today. That leads me to believe that we're going to start to see a pretty substantial pickup in export movement, physical movement of that grain. As we've talked about in past weeks, we have a large amount of unshipped grain that is on the books for corn. So this week we're at 17.4 million metric tons of corn still left to ship and leave the country. Last week that number was at 17.2, so we continue to raise that unshipped quantity that needs to be moved, which in my opinion is probably favorable for basis, especially along these river terminals where they're going to have to bid it out of farmer hands. That concludes our weekly wrap-up. Feel free to contact us at 877-472-4607 or visit us online at grainhedge.com. Have a great weekend.